There's a very specific kind of stress that only comes from hearing the words, "Your base is under attack." The frantic clicking, endless hotkeys, absolute panic of trying to wall off a rush you didn't see coming. Real-time strategy games might not dominate the industry exactly the way they did in the 90s and 2000s, but the truth is, the heavy hitters never actually left. Today I am breaking down the absolute best RTS games that have really just survived the test of time and still worth playing right now. Grab your mouse, queue up your workers, and let's get started.
SCV ready.
Look, if you boot up Warzone 2100 right now, your first thought is probably going to be that it looks like a jagged PS1 game. And honestly, you are right. The graphics are undeniably ancient, and the unit pathing will genuinely make you want to put your fist through your monitor when half your strike force gets stuck behind a single tree while an enemy faction is actively burning down your power generators. It has that late 90s jank, and there is no escaping it. But the reason people are still playing this weird post-apocalyptic RTS from 1999 is because it mechanically does stuff that modern developers are just completely unwilling to try. The biggest hook is the unit design. You do not just click a button to spam pre-made tanks. There is no standard unit roster. You literally piece your entire army together yourself. You unlock a chassis, decide if you want it rolling on half-tracks, hovercraft pads, or heavy treads, and then bolt whatever weird weapon you just researched right on top. The tech tree is completely absurd. There are over 400 nodes to research, which sounds awesome until you realize it is also a massive noob trap. If you queue up a multiplayer match and just start researching whatever sounds cool, you will end up soft-locking your progression and getting completely rolled in 10 minutes by some sweaty veteran who has the optimal rush build permanently burned into their brain. The multiplayer community is small, extremely dedicated, and completely ruthless. Where the beam actually shines for most people is the campaign, purely because of the persistent base building. In almost every other RTS, you spend an hour building a massive, perfectly defended fortress, finish the mission, and then the next level forces you to start completely over with a single command center. Warzone does not do that. You stay on the same map, the borders just expand. If you spend 2 hours building a ridiculous, heavily fortified choke point with walls and bunkers in Mission 1, that exact base is still sitting there waiting for you in Mission 3. You actually feel like you are establishing a foothold in a wasteland rather than just playing isolated skirmishes. The artillery is also wildly satisfying. You can build dedicated sensor towers, link them to a battery of long-range mortars tucked safely in the back of your base, and the second an enemy walks into the sensor's vision cone, your guns will automatically rain absolute hell on them from halfway across the map. So yeah, the UI is clunky, the learning curve is basically a brick wall, and it shows its age in almost every visual category. But it went totally open source years ago. It is 100% free, constantly updated by a community that refuses to let it die, and it will run at a flawless frame rate on a laptop from a decade ago. If you can handle the ugly polygons and the fact that your units sometimes forget how to walk in a straight line, the actual tactical sandbox underneath is incredibly addictive.
Construction completed.
This one is basically the holy grail if you ever looked at Age of Empires and thought, man, I wish this played a little more like Civilization. It is from that golden era of early 2000s RTS games, and honestly, the concept alone is still wild. You start out banging rocks together with spearmen in the ancient age, and an hour later you are dropping stealth bombers and actual nukes on your buddy's capital city. The biggest mechanic that makes it stand out is how it handles territory. You don't just build wherever you want. You have actual national borders that push outward as you build cities and research tech. If an enemy walks into your territory without bringing a supply wagon, their army starts taking massive attrition damage. It completely shuts down a lot of the annoying proxy-based cheese you see in games like Starcraft. Plus, resource nodes never run out. You just build a lumber camp near a forest, assign some workers, and they chop wood forever. It takes a lot of the stressful micromanagement out of the economy so you can actually focus on the bigger picture. Picking this game up today can be overwhelming. There are 6 different resources you have to manage: food, wood, wealth, knowledge, metal, and oil. Trying to keep all those economies balanced while simultaneously fighting a war and trying to age up your civilization will completely fry your brain if you aren't used to heavy macro games. Even with the jank, it is completely worth playing, especially if you just want to mess around in the Conquer the World single-player campaign, which plays like a massive game of Risk where you fight out the battles in real time. So yeah, Starcraft 2. I feel like this is one of those games where even if you've never played RTS games, you've at least heard of it. Like, it just kind of exists in that space as the RTS game for a lot of people. And going back to it now is kinda weird, because on one hand it feels old, but then you actually start playing it and it really doesn't feel old in the ways you'd expect. Like, the controls are still insanely tight. You click something, units move instantly, everything just feels super responsive, there's no jank there. Which is kind of crazy considering how many newer RTS games still don't feel this good. I started with the campaign again, and honestly, that's probably the best way to play it now unless you're like really trying to sweat. The campaign is actually pretty fun. It's not just build base, destroy enemy over and over. They throw in a lot of different mission types. Some are more defensive, some are more like timed pushes, some are just weird gimmick missions that somehow work. The story though, I mean, it's fine. It's very Blizzard sci-fi. A bit cheesy, a bit dramatic. Some characters are cool, some are kinda whatever. I don't think anyone is really playing Starcraft 2 for the story, but it does its job. It gives you a reason to keep going. Where things get kind of intense is multiplayer, and I mean really intense. Like, I jumped into a couple matches just to see, and yeah, people are still crazy at this game. Even at lower levels, people are doing build orders, managing everything perfectly, moving at like 200 actions per minute. It can feel kind of overwhelming if you're just trying to chill. And that's probably the biggest thing with this game now, is it's not very forgiving. If you mess up early, you feel it immediately. There's not a lot of room to just mess around and recover unless you actually know what you're doing. But at the same time, that's also why people love it. When you do pull something off, when your strategy actually works, it feels really good, like you actually earned it. Visually, I think it still holds up fine. It's not trying to be super realistic or anything, it's more about clarity. You can always tell what's going on, which is way more important in a game like this. Big fights don't turn into visual noise. Also, there's just a ton of stuff in the game. Like, if you don't want to deal with competitive multiplayer, there's co-op missions, custom games, arcade modes. You can spend a lot of time here without ever touching ranked. I guess the only real downside now is that it feels a little, I don't know, settled. Like it's not really evolving anymore. It's kind of just there. Still great, still super polished, but not really moving forward. But yeah, overall it's still really good. It's just one of those games where you kind of have to know what you're getting into. If you want a chill RTS, this might not be it. But if you want something that feels super precise and competitive, it's still hard to beat.
Just tell us where you want us.
Welcome aboard, boys.
Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition, like right away the pace is slower. Not in a bad way, just you feel it. You're not instantly stressing about APM or getting rushed in the first 2 minutes. It's more about building up, taking your time, kind of easing into things. You start with a couple villagers, you're chopping wood, gathering food, slowly expanding. It's almost relaxing at first. And honestly, that's a big reason why this game still works. It's just really easy to get into. You don't feel like the game is yelling at you to play perfectly. I jumped back into some skirmishes and campaigns, and yeah, it still has that one more match thing. You tell yourself you'll just play a quick game, and then suddenly it's been like an hour because matches take their time. You build up your base, walls actually matter, positioning matters, and fights feel more like these big, messy, medieval clashes instead of super precise micro battles. The Definitive Edition upgrade is actually pretty noticeable too. The visuals are cleaner, more detailed, but they didn't mess with the original feel. It still looks like Age of Empires 2, just sharper. Same with the sound, that classic voice acting, the wololo stuff, it's all still there. The campaigns are kind of the standout here though. There's just a ton of them, like actual historical campaigns based on different civilizations, and they're surprisingly engaging. Not in a super cinematic way or anything, but more like you just get invested in the scenarios. Each one throws different situations at you instead of repeating the same thing. Now, the combat itself, I feel like this is where some people might bounce off. It's not as tight or responsive as something like Starcraft. Units can feel a little clunky, pathfinding can still be weird sometimes, especially in big battles. You'll have moments where your army just kinda derps around and you're like, what are you doing? But weirdly, that's also part of the charm. The game isn't about perfect control, it's more about planning, economy, and positioning over time. Oh man, Red Alert 2. If you grew up playing PC games in the early 2000s, just reading that name probably makes the heavy metal Hell March riff start playing in your head. This game is pure, unadulterated B-movie chaos. You pick either the Allies or the Soviets, unpack your construction yard, and immediately start scrambling for ore. There is no slow, methodical build-up like you get in Age of Empires. Within 10 minutes, you are churning out an absurd number of tanks, training attack dogs, and launching paratroopers out of the sky. The single-player campaign is iconic because the cutscenes are entirely live action, featuring real actors who are completely overacting and chewing the scenery. The plot is totally ridiculous. You're dealing with mind-controlling psychic mutants, massive Soviet zeppelins dropping bombs, and literal weather control machines. You don't play this game for a serious military simulation. You play it to drop a nuke on an opponent while a guy named Yuri tries to brainwash your tanks. Mechanically, RA2 is built for pure speed and aggression. You don't have to worry about balancing a bunch of different economies, you just mine ore to get money and build power plants to keep your base running. If your power grid gets blown up, your radar drops and your automated base defenses shut off, leaving you completely exposed. One of the best tactical additions at the time was letting you garrison infantry inside neutral civilian buildings. You can take a random burger joint in the middle of a city map, cram it full of rocket troops, and turn it into a lethal choke point. But I will be totally honest about the jank. The pathfinding for your ore miners is notoriously brain dead. They will constantly empty out a safe patch of ore and then just wander halfway across the map directly into an enemy base to grab a single gem, getting themselves instantly killed and tanking your economy. Moving a massive blob of 50 tanks around a narrow bridge or a cliff is also a complete nightmare of units bumping into each other. For years, trying to get this game to run on a modern Windows 10 or 11 PC was an absolute headache of black screens and crashes. Luckily, EA finally dropped it on Steam recently and patched it up so it actually works out of the box now.
Unit lost. Unit ready.
Company of Heroes 3. This is a World War II RTS focusing on the Italian and North African theaters, but it completely ditches the traditional resource gathering you see in most games. Nobody is chopping wood or mining gold. Instead, the entire economy is tied to map control. You have to push out immediately and capture strategic points to earn munitions and fuel. It completely forces you to play aggressively, so if you are the type of player who likes to sit in your base and build a massive army for 40 minutes before fighting, this game will punish you hard. The mechanics are what make the KOH 3 series so legendary, and the third game still nails the core combat. You can't just right-click a squad of infantry onto a machine gun nest and expect them to win. If your troops aren't physically hiding behind a low stone wall, hunkered down in a trench, or garrisoned inside a house, they will get absolutely shredded in seconds. Positioning means everything. Tanks actually have directional armor, meaning if you can sneak an anti-tank squad around the side streets and hit a panzer in the rear engine block, you can wipe it out instantly. Plus, the destruction engine is incredible. If an enemy squad is pinning you down from the second floor of a cafe, you don't have to shoot it out with them. You can just roll a Sherman tank up and literally collapse the building on top of them.
What now? Enemy HMG up ahead!
We're jumping from the ancient retro stuff straight into modern territory here. If you ever played the original Sins of a Solar Empire or the Rebellion expansion back in the day, you already know this is less of a traditional RTS and more of a massive 4X space empire simulator playing out in real time. You do not boot this game up for a quick 20-minute match before work. You boot this up with your friends on a Friday night, order a pizza, and strap in for a 3-hour galactic war. You start with a single home planet and a basic capital ship, and you have to slowly expand outward, bombing pirate outposts, colonizing asteroids, and establishing trade networks. It is a slow burn. You spend the first hour just managing your economy, mining metal, harvesting crystal, and generating credits while scouting your neighbors. By the time the endgame hits, you are smashing massive screen-filling armadas consisting of dozens of capital ships, hundreds of frigates, and swarms of strike craft into each other over a burning planet. The absolute biggest mind-bending mechanic they added in the sequel is orbital dynamics. The map is not static anymore. Planets literally orbit the star in real time, which means the hyperlanes connecting the gravity wells are constantly shifting. You might lock down an asteroid belt and turn it into a heavily fortified choke point, only to watch that asteroid orbit away an hour later, opening a direct jump lane right into the vulnerable back half of your empire. It completely forces you to stay awake and adapt your defenses. Also, they finally built a modern 64-bit engine with multi-core support. In the first game, if you got to the late game and everyone had massive fleets, the game engine would literally choke and drop to 10 frames per second. Sins 2 handles those massive firefights way smoother. Every single missile is simulated, and turrets actually have to physically track their targets to land a hit. And one thing I'm gonna shoot you straight, there is no single-player story campaign. If you want a crafted narrative with cutscenes and character arcs, you will not find it here. This is a pure sandbox skirmish game. Also, the UI can feel a little bit like a spreadsheet sometimes when you're trying to manage the economies of 20 different planets at once. But if you want the ultimate commander of a massive sci-fi fleet power fantasy, nothing else really touches it right now. Watching your Titan-class dreadnought warp into a gravity well and just start melting enemy cruisers with broadside laser batteries is incredibly satisfying. Just be prepared to accidentally lose an entire weekend to a single match.
Required. Military research complete.
Stronghold Definitive Edition. If you ever wanted to sit in a chair and just meticulously build an absolute unit of a medieval castle, this is basically the godfather of that specific itch. The original came out way back in 2001, and Firefly Studios actually went back and remastered the whole thing for modern PCs recently, and they honestly did a pretty solid job respecting what made it great in the first place without ruining it. The whole hook here is that it sits right on the line between a city builder and an RTS. Instead of just spawning units out of a barracks using generic gold, you have to actually run the entire medieval supply chain. You need woodcutters to get timber, then you send that timber to a fletcher who carves it into a bow, and then that bow goes to the armory. Only then can you grab a peasant off the street and turn them into an archer. You are managing taxes, food rations, and whether or not to give your peasants extra ale so they don't get angry and leave your castle. It makes surviving a massive siege feel way more personal, because you literally watched the guy who just died on your wall eat his morning ration of cheese. As for the Definitive Edition upgrades, they actually redrew the 2D sprites so the game doesn't look like total pixelated mud on a modern monitor, which is a massive lifesaver. They also added integrated Steam multiplayer, so you don't have to jump through insane firewall hoops or use third-party apps to play with your buddies anymore. Plus, they threw in a whole new campaign for the veteran players. If you are looking for incredibly deep, modern, tactical combat with smooth unit controls, this ain't it. But if you want the ultimate medieval turtle fest where you can spend an hour building an impenetrable fortress with moats, pitch ditches, and double-thick stone walls, and then watch a bunch of AI armies break themselves against it, there is still nothing that scratches that exact itch quite like Stronghold. Plus, hearing the advisor tell you wood needed for the 500th time is basically pure gaming heritage at this point. Look, the Battle for Middle-earth games are basically the holy grail for anyone who grew up obsessed with the movies. It's actually kind of wild that we haven't seen anything quite like them since. Even though they're technically abandonware now because of some massive licensing nightmares, the community has absolutely refused to let them die, putting out huge patches and mods just to make sure they run on modern rigs. The weirdest thing about these games is how different they feel from each other. The first one is all about the movies and uses this foundation system, where you can only build structures on specific preset plots. It sounds like it would be restrictive, but it actually makes the sieges feel incredibly authentic, because you aren't just clicking a base together, you're defending Helm's Deep or Minas Tirith exactly where the walls are supposed to be. Then the second game came along and threw all that out for a more traditional RTS style, where you can build anywhere, and it pulled heavily from the books to show the war in the north with elves and dwarves that the movies mostly skipped. The absolute standout feature here is the War of the Ring mode. It's essentially Risk, but with Lord of the Rings units. You're moving these armies across a giant map of Middle-earth, and when two forces meet, you jump down into a real-time battle to settle it. In the first game, the campaign was built around this world map, and you'd keep your veteran units from mission to mission, which gave the whole thing this epic, persistent feel, where losing a battalion of archers actually mattered. Watching a literal Balrog or a pack of Mumakil, those giant elephants, tear through a line of infantry is still one of the most satisfying things in any RTS. The heroes aren't just strong units, they're total game changers. Seeing Gandalf drop a word of power or the Witch King on his fell beast wipe out an entire army, if you time it right, is just awesome. Plus, they use the actual movie music and some of the original voice actors, so hearing Howard Shore's score kick in when you charge your cavalry into a group of orcs never gets old. But man, these games definitely have some serious jank. Getting the second one running on Windows 11 without fan-made fixes is a total nightmare because of ancient DRM and admin errors. The AI also loves to play hide and seek with its last few buildings, which can turn a fun match into a tedious chore. The balance is also pretty questionable. Certain factions have these cheap mechanics that can feel broken if you're trying to play competitively, but honestly, if you're just here to smash Isengard with a bunch of Ents, you probably won't care. Ultimately, it's absolutely still worth playing. Even in 2026, there isn't another RTS that captures the sheer scale and majesty of Middle-earth like this. It's a bit of a hassle to set up since you can't just buy it on Steam, but once you're in, it feels like coming home. If you want that feeling of achievement after a 2-hour siege where you barely held the gate by the skin of your teeth, this is the one. It's just a good-ass time.
Hit them hard! For burning! Watch out!
So yeah, total Annihilation. This one's all about scale and flow. What stands out immediately is how the economy works. It's not that usual collect, spend, repeat thing. It's more like everything's constantly moving. Energy and metal are always coming in, always being used, so you're kind of riding this balance the whole time. You overdo it, everything slows down. You manage it well, your whole base just keeps pumping. And once that gets going, the game kind of turns into this non-stop production machine. You're just building units constantly. Not small squads, like full-on waves of stuff. Tanks rolling out, bots everywhere, aircraft flying over, artillery hitting from across the map. It feels less like controlling an army and more like managing a system that keeps spitting out war. Fights aren't really about perfect control either. It's more about positioning and momentum. You send groups out, you reinforce, you pressure different parts of the map. While that's happening, you're still back at base, expanding, setting up more production, keeping that flow going. There's also a lot of freedom in how you approach things. You can lean into defenses and slowly push out, or just go aggressive and flood the map. Air units, long-range stuff, heavy ground units, you can kind of commit to whatever and make it work if you manage it properly. The campaign is there, but honestly it's more about understanding how the game works than anything else. The real fun is just getting into matches and letting everything escalate. What I like about it is that it doesn't feel restrictive. Once things get going, it just keeps building into bigger and bigger battles, and you're constantly adjusting to that. It's one of those games where you kind of settle into a rhythm, and then suddenly everything is exploding across the map, and you're just trying to stay on top of it. They are billions. Look, this is game frickin' brutal. It's punishing, and it'll make you want to uninstall it about once every 3 hours, but then you find yourself clicking new game at 2 AM anyway. The hook is simple. It's a steampunk zombie survival builder where you aren't managing a small squad, you're managing a colony that is constantly one tiny mistake away from a total screaming collapse. The core gameplay loop is actually really solid, but it's definitely for a certain type of player. You're balancing the expansion of your base with the desperate need for defense, and space is your most valuable resource. You need it for houses and farms, but every foot you take is another foot of wall you have to defend. The infection mechanic is what makes this game unique and, frankly, infuriating. If one single zombie slips past your patrol and hits a house, that house turns into more zombies. Those zombies hit the neighbors, and within 30 seconds your entire economy is a graveyard. There's no undo button here. It's an Iron Man style save system that saves when you quit, so if you mess up, that 2-hour session is just gone. It can feel incredibly frustrating and sometimes tedious because losing 20 minutes or 2 hours of progress just because you weren't looking at one corner of the map is pretty brutal. If you're the type of person who likes losing is fun games, like if you played Death Stranding and actually enjoyed those more arduous treks where you feel desperate, then yeah, this is a top tier RTS. It's one of the few games in the genre that actually makes you feel like you're surviving against impossible odds. Just don't go into it expecting a relaxing city builder. It's a high stakes stress simulator that will punish your arrogance every single time. It's a good ass game, just be ready to have your ass handed to you. Dark Reign is one of those massive what-if tragedies of PC gaming. It dropped in 1997 and was genuinely doing things that no other developer was even attempting at the time. But it had the ultimate misfortune of launching right next to Total Annihilation and just a few months before Starcraft. It got completely buried by the heavyweights. But if you actually played it back then, you know it was incredibly ruthless and weirdly ahead of the curve. The setup is a brutal, grimdark sci-fi war. You have the Imperium, who are essentially the massively funded totalitarian space cops with heavy armor, and the Freedom Guard, a scrappy rebel faction that relies heavily on hit-and-run tactics, ambushes, and phasing units that can literally tunnel underground. You load into a map, and the entire economy is balanced on a razor's edge between two resources: Talion, your standard glowing sci-fi crystal money, and water. The water mechanic completely changes how you build your base. Water springs are usually scattered around the map, and your water freighters have to physically suck it out of the ground to keep your production moving. It creates this incredibly stressful dynamic where your water freighters are massive, slow, vulnerable targets. If an opponent sneaks a couple of hover tanks into your backline and snipes your water supply, your entire military-industrial complex grinds to a dead, horrifying halt. You spend half the game frantically babysitting your supply lines. But now I want to talk about the mechanics, and I think this is where Dark Reign absolutely flexed on the competition from that era. The unit AI and pathfinding controls were completely insane for 1997. You didn't just group a bunch of tanks together, click an enemy base, and hope they figured it out. You could set highly specific individual behavioral orders. You could tell a scout unit to actively search for enemy structures, ping them on the minimap, and immediately retreat the second they took damage. You could set a strike force to harass the enemy's resource lines and automatically run back to a repair facility when their health got low. You could dictate their exact engagement range and pursuit distance. It gave you a level of macro control that made you feel like an actual general rather than a guy frantically clicking a mouse. On top of that, terrain elevation actually mattered, which was a huge deal back then. If you parked your artillery on top of a cliff, they gained a massive line of sight advantage and could rain fire down into the valley, while units at the bottom literally couldn't see you. If your infantry ran through a forest, they moved slower but were actively harder to hit. You could also build spies to infiltrate enemy bases, steal the blueprints for their faction's specific heavy units, and start mass-producing their own tech against them. So, if we're talking about the heavy hitters, we have to talk about Warhammer 40,000: Dawn of War. This game came out in 2004, and it basically took the traditional RTS formula and shoved a chainsaw sword through it. Even now, in 2026, it still feels more alive than half the strategy games coming out today. The big thing here is that it moved away from the tedious resource gathering of most RTS games. You aren't sending little workers to chop wood or mine gold. Instead, you're fighting for strategic points on the map. You have to physically park your squads on these points to capture them, and that's how you get your requisition. It forces you to actually play the game and engage with the enemy immediately. You can't just sit in your base behind 10 layers of walls and wait for the late game, because if you don't own the map, you don't have an economy. It makes every match feel like a constant, desperate tug of war. The combat is where this thing really shines though. Most RTS games at the time had units just kind of standing near each other and shooting until a health bar went down, but Dawn of War gave us sync kills. Watching a Dreadnought pick up an Orc and literally tear him in half, or a Bloodthirster swat a squad of Space Marines like flies, is still incredibly satisfying. It's got that raw, gritty feel of the 40k universe, where everything is over the top and slightly insane. You're managing squads, not individual units, so you're reinforcing them in the field while they're under fire, which adds this layer of tactical stress that just works. But look, it's definitely showing its age in some spots. The pathfinding can be a total nightmare. You'll tell a squad to move through a gap and they'll decide to take the scenic route right through an enemy gun line, or they'll get stuck on a pebble and just jitter in place while they're getting shot. It can be incredibly frustrating when a mission goes sideways because your pathing decided to take a lunch break. Also, the camera is zoomed in way too tight by modern standards. You'll find yourself constantly scrolling just to see what's happening 10 feet in front of your base. The expansions, specifically Dark Crusade, are where the game really peaked. They added a non-linear planetary conquest map that feels a lot like that War of the Ring mode we talked about. You pick a faction and slowly take over a whole world, and it gives you that huge sense of achievement when you finally crush a rival's capital. It's just a good-ass game that respects your time by keeping the focus on the fighting rather than the accounting. This is peak late 90s PC gaming right here. Bullfrog Productions basically invented a whole new subgenre with these two. Instead of playing the shining hero trying to save the world, you are the absolute worst villain imaginable, just trying to run your underground evil lair in peace while annoying do-gooders constantly try to break in and steal your gold. The setup is basically a reverse dungeon crawler. You start with a glowing dungeon heart and a handful of little imps. You highlight blocks of dirt and rock for them to mine out, carving your own custom layout into the underground. Then you start slapping down rooms. Hatcheries to spawn chickens for food, lairs for sleeping, training rooms, libraries for researching spells, and torture chambers. Depending on what rooms you build, different monsters wander in through your portal to join your army. You get everything from basic goblins and warlocks to massive farting bile demons and leather-clad dark mistresses. You just manage your dungeon, pay your creatures their wages on payday so they don't get angry and trash the place, and wait for the AI heroes, knights, wizards, and elves to tunnel in so your horde can absolutely dismantle them. The mechanics are incredibly tactile and totally unique. You don't just box select units and right-click to move them like a normal RTS. You have a giant demonic hand acting as your cursor. If your imps are mining too slow, you right-click to slap them across the face and make them work faster. If a fight breaks out in your dungeon, you scoop your creatures up by the scruff of their necks, hold them in your hand, and just physically drop them directly into the melee. The coolest feature though is the possession spell. At any point, you can cast it on one of your creatures and the camera drops into a first-person view. You literally run around the dungeon you just built through the eyes of a warlock or a vampire, casting spells and fighting heroes yourself. The debate between whether DK1 or DK2 is better is basically a permanent war in the retro community. DK1 is sprite-based, incredibly dark, visually gritty, and has an announcer who sounds genuinely malevolent. DK2 made the jump to full 3D, smoothed out a lot of the UI jank and leaned way heavier into the dark, goofy humor, but some purists think it lost a bit of the raw and nasty edge of the original. This one's kinda low-key, like not a lot of people bring it up anymore, but it's got its own thing going on. So the setup is pretty simple, humans versus aliens fighting over Mars, but the way it plays actually feels a bit different from the usual RTS flow. The biggest thing I always notice with this game is the atmosphere. It leans into that darker, kinda uneasy sci-fi tone. A lot of missions feel more controlled, almost tense in a smaller scale way. You're not just spamming huge armies all the time. You're moving units carefully, clearing areas, dealing with enemies that can mess you up if you're sloppy. There's also this day-night cycle, and it actually matters. Humans are weaker at night, aliens are stronger. So you're constantly thinking about when to push, when to hold back. It's a simple idea, but it changes how you play without making things complicated. The campaign is pretty straightforward, but it keeps things moving. Missions aren't super long, and they usually give you a clear goal. Go here, clear this, defend that. It doesn't drag. Unit control feels a bit more grounded too. You're not managing massive armies, so you pay more attention to individual squads. It almost leans a little toward that tactical RTS feel at times. There's also some jank here and there. Units can act a little weird, pathing isn't always clean, and the AI can be hit or miss. But it doesn't really take away from the core loop. What stands out is just how focused it feels. It's not trying to do everything. It sticks to its setting, its pacing, and just runs with that. It's not a huge, flashy RTS. It's more of a contained experience, where you're managing smaller fights, dealing with the environment, and just pushing forward mission by mission. Emperor Battle for Dune is such a weird, fascinating relic. It's the direct sequel to Dune 2000, and for a lot of people, it's the best Dune game ever made. This was Westwood's big jump into 3D, and you can really feel them trying to figure out how to make that work while still keeping that classic Command and Conquer DNA. The game's campaign is actually its strongest suit. It's non-linear, so instead of just following a list of missions, you're looking at a strategic map of Arrakis with 33 territories. You pick where to attack, and the territories you hold actually matter because they can give you reinforcements in later battles. It's got that War of the Ring vibe where you're moving armies around, and it makes the war feel much bigger than just a series of skirmishes. Plus, the FMV cutscenes are classic Westwood, campy, exaggerated, and absolutely immersive in that early 2000s way. Mechanically, it's a bit of a mixed bag. They kept the three classic houses, Atreides, Harkonnen, and Ordos, but they gave them much more distinct identities this time. The Atreides are your infantry-heavy good guys, the Harkonnen are all about brute force and slow-as-hell walkers like the Devastator, and the Ordos are the sneaky ones using shields and mind control. A really cool touch is that you can ally with sub-factions like the Fremen or the Sardaukar to get unique units, which adds a lot of replayability because your army can look totally different depending on who you side with. But man, the technical side is where the frustration sets in. Playing this in 2026 is a chore because it's one of those early 3D games that just hates modern operating systems. If you try to run it on Windows 10 or 11 without a ton of fan patches, you're gonna run into massive lag, screen flickering, or just straight up crashes. Even back in the day, the pathfinding was pretty meh. Units would get stuck on trees or take the longest possible route to a fight. And the AI? It's not great. Even on the hardest setting, it tends to just throw the same predictable waves at you over and over.
If it moves, we'll fix it at once, sir.
Like, the first thing you notice is how units work. You're not just clicking a building and pumping out soldiers. You're training peasants and then sending them into different buildings to turn them into units. So one guy can become a swordsman or an archer or whatever depending on what you do with him. It sounds simple, but it actually makes you think a bit more about what you're building instead of just spamming stuff. And because of that, you kind of pay more attention to individual units. It's not huge armies crashing into each other all the time. Fights feel smaller, more readable. You actually see what your units are doing instead of just watching a blob. The whole game has this strong Japanese-inspired vibe too. The factions, the music, the way units talk, even the menus. It all feels very intentional. It's not just a skin, it actually carries through the whole experience. There's also this yin and yang system going on, where your choices kind of affect your alignment and what units or abilities you lean into. It's not super complex, but it adds a bit of identity to how you play. Another thing I always liked is how the world itself matters. Forests burn, water spreads fire, terrain actually affects fights a bit. It's not super deep, but it's enough that you notice it and start using it. The campaign is solid. It's more narrative focused than a lot of RTS games, with actual characters and progression. Nothing crazy, but it keeps you engaged. Now, it's not perfect. The pace can feel a bit slow sometimes, especially early on when you're building everything up from peasants. And if you're used to faster RTS games, it might feel like it takes a while to get going. Pathfinding and unit behavior can also get a little awkward here and there. You'll have moments where things don't move exactly how you want. But yeah, this is one of those games that sticks with people because it doesn't feel like everything else. The unit training system alone makes it stand out. It's not trying to overwhelm you with scale or speed. It's more about how you build your army and how those small fights play out. Populous: The Beginning is another classic from the Bullfrog Vault, but instead of playing an underground villain, you are straight up trying to become a god. This dropped back in 1998, and it was the first time the series went full 3D. And when I say 3D, I mean you are actually playing on literal spherical planets that you can physically spin around with your mouse. It is a completely wild perspective for an RTS. Instead of being an invisible commander floating in the sky, you actually control a specific physical unit on the map called the Shaman. You lead a tribe of followers, and your entire goal is to travel across the solar system, wipe out rival tribes, and ascend to godhood. You order your basic braves to chop wood and build huts. The more huts you have, the more your population breeds, which slowly generates mana for your shaman. Once your economy gets rolling, you train those braves into actual combat units like warriors, fire warriors, or preachers, and march them across the planet to burn the enemy village to the ground. The absolute best reason to play this game is the magic system. Your shaman is basically a walking weapon of mass destruction. Once you have enough mana, you can cast spells that permanently deform the terrain. You can drop a literal volcano right in the middle of an enemy base, watch the ground physically rise up and see their buildings slide down into the lava. You can cast tornadoes that pick up enemy troops and fling them across the map, or use the land bridge spell to connect two islands so your army can walk straight across the ocean. Also, the preacher units are hilarious. You send them to the front lines, they sit down, start chanting, and they literally convert enemy soldiers to your side mid-fight. You can steal half an army before a battle even starts. I will give you the bad news first though. The camera takes some serious getting used to. Because you are playing on a tiny globe, rotating the map can feel pretty disorienting, and the unit pathfinding on that curved terrain gets super sketchy at times. You will definitely lose units because they decided to take a weird route directly into an enemy patrol instead of the safe path you clicked. But honestly, the power fantasy is just unmatched. Very few modern games let you completely ruin an opponent's day by summoning a swarm of deadly insects, or sinking the actual land their base is built on right into the sea. If you want to play it now, the GOG version works, but the hardcore fans use a custom client called the Populous Matchmaker to fix the resolution and play online. It is absolutely worth messing around with just to cast a volcano and watch the chaos unfold. If you're digging for absolute fossils, you can't get much deeper than Jurassic War. This is a Korean RTS from 1996 that feels like it was designed by someone who thought Warcraft was okay, but really needed more cavemen, magic, and T-Rexes. It's a weird, flamboyant mess of a game, but I'll be honest, it's got some of the most unique ideas from that era, even if it tries its hardest to make you hate playing it. The whole vibe is Dream Island, where 8 different tribes are fighting for control. Each tribe has its own gimmick. Some are into training dinosaurs, some have powerful magicians, and others just craft really good spears. It's not just a copy-paste job either. The Maasai tribe is all about those weapons, while the Muspel summon literal demons. The plot is told through walls of butchered English that make almost zero sense, but you aren't here for the Shakespearean prose. You're here to watch a velociraptor eat a wizard. The economy is where this game really goes off the rails in a cool way. There's no gold mining or wood chopping. Your only resource is food, which is basically just raw meat. The only way to get it is by hunting wild animals like mammoths or saber-toothed tigers that respawn around the map. You use that meat to build structures and train units, but your troops also need to eat it to heal. It forces you to actually secure hunting grounds instead of just turtling in your base. The RPG elements are actually way ahead of their time. Every unit gains experience and levels up as they kill things. You can even customize their stats, health, defense, magic, speed, by ticking little stones in the UI. You can basically turn a single caveman into a god-tier warrior who's hardier than a castle, but if you lose him, you're basically starting from scratch. It adds this layer of strategic possibilities that most RTS games didn't touch back then. But man, the jank is real. The pathfinding is an absolute nightmare. Your units will get stuck on a single tree in an open field, or just jitter in place when they bump into each other. The responsiveness is horrible, and in a fight, your units often won't even react to an enemy right next to them unless you manually tell them to. It requires a level of micromanagement that's just agonizing. Plus, there's no skirmish mode because the AI is too dumb to handle the complex mechanics, so you're stuck with the 12 mission campaigns. Age of Mythology is what happens when you take the rock-solid Age of Empires formula and inject it with pure chaotic Greek, Egyptian, and Norse mythology. Instead of just upgrading your swordsmen to slightly shinier swordsmen, you are literally summoning minotaurs to flip enemy soldiers into the air and raining actual meteors down on their town centers. It is a completely wild spin on the genre, and the original campaign following Arkantos is legitimately one of the best single-player stories ever put into an RTS. The biggest twist to the formula is how you progress through the match. Every time you advance to the next era, you have to choose a minor god to worship, and that choice completely dictates your playstyle for the rest of the game. You might pick one god to get a bunch of aggressive infantry upgrades and a power that freezes enemy units, or go with another strictly for massive economy boosts. You also have to manage a completely new resource called Favor, which you earn differently depending on your pantheon. The Greeks get it by assigning villagers to pray at temples, the Egyptians have to build massive, expensive monuments, and the Norse get favored by actively punching people in the face in combat. It makes every single faction feel completely distinct. Armies of Exigo. This one's kind of funny because the first time you play it, you're like, okay, yeah, I've seen this before, and then it starts doing its own thing. So yeah, on the surface, it feels very Warcrafty. You've got your factions, heroes, base building, all that stuff. It's familiar pretty quickly. But the thing that actually makes it stand out is the whole underground system. Basically, the map isn't just one layer. There's a surface, and then there's a whole underground network, and you can move units between them. So you'll be playing normally on the surface, building your base, scouting, whatever, and then suddenly there's stuff happening underneath you too. It changes how you think about the map a lot. You're not just defending one area, you're kind of covering two spaces at once. You can use the underground to sneak units around, set up attacks, avoid defenses. It adds this extra layer, without making the game complicated to understand. The factions are pretty solid too. Each one has its own feel. The Fallen, the Empire, the Beasts, they all play a bit differently. Not in a super drastic way, but enough that you notice it. The campaign is actually decent. It's not super deep story-wise, but it moves along well and does a good job introducing mechanics. You're not stuck doing the same type of mission over and over. Combat feels familiar in a good way. If you've played Warcraft 3, you'll pick this up pretty fast. Heroes, abilities, smaller army control, it's all there. Where it falls a bit short is that it never really pushes beyond that. Like, once you get used to the underground mechanic, the rest of the game plays it pretty safe. It doesn't keep building on that idea as much as it could. There are also moments where things feel a little rough around the edges. Unit control isn't always perfect, and sometimes fights feel a bit less responsive than you'd want.
On my way.
Beyond All Reason, or BAR as everyone calls it, is basically what happens when a group of hardcore RTS nerds look at Total Annihilation and Supreme Commander and decide to just build their own massive open source sequel. It is completely free, actively developed by the community, and honestly, it puts a lot of modern AAA strategy games to shame with how incredibly smooth it runs. The biggest mechanic you have to wrap your head around is the streaming economy. You are not waiting to bank up 500 gold to click a button and buy a tank. Your resources, metal and energy, are constantly flowing in and flowing out. If you are generating 50 metal a second and spending 50 metal a second on your factories, your economy is perfectly balanced. It completely messes with your head if you are used to Age of Empires or Starcraft. You are just laying down massive factory queues and trying to make sure your resource grid doesn't stall and crash your entire war machine. Plus, every single projectile in the game is physically simulated. If you fire a plasma cannon at a fast-moving hovercraft, it can literally miss, or the shot might accidentally hit a mountain ridge in the way instead of the target. The scale of the fights is completely absurd. You can load into massive 8 vs 8 multiplayer matches where thousands of units are clashing on the screen at the exact same time. The late game is just pure chaos with experimental mechs the size of skyscrapers, nuclear missiles flying across the map, and massive anti-nuke defense grids trying to swat them out of the sky.